Excellent, excellent. Well, to everyone joining us, welcome and thanks for being here. As we are approaching fire season, Frontline EMS is excited to answer many of your questions that are pertaining to the mix of EMS and wildfires. My name's Emma, and I'm going to be hosting this webinar this morning, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's panel. Contract medic turned CEO, Richard Bull's non-traditional adventures in medicine have taken him all over the world and to the front of business and innovation in EMS. Pulling on his perspectives as a paramedic, Bull started Frontline EMS, which is now one of the fastest growing and most successful private medical contracting companies in the country. And this is thanks to the company's strict focus on its providers and unmatched employee satisfaction. Next up, we have Rick Goebel. Goebel is coming into his 28th Wildland Fire season, having worked all operational aspects of Wildland Fire, crews, engines, aviation, and even heavy equipment. Goebel has spent 27 years in EMS working urban, rural, and backcountry. Goebel is a licensed paramedic, EMPF, and qualified medical unit leader. Finally, we have Rich Dobson. Now, Dobson is a national registered and HCPC licensed paramedic. He's a certified forensic paramedic and emergency care practitioner. Dobson has been an EMPF for 3 years and will be deploying on a REMS team this year. Now, if you'll just kindly turn your attention to Mr. Richard Bull, CEO and founder of Frontline EMS.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you, Rich and Mr. Dobson, Mr. Goebel, for joining us also. For those of you who are tuning in, I know that a lot of you do have a lot of questions. A lot of you might have heard about the medical perspectives as they pertain to wildland fire management, and I understand that there's a lot of just a lot of questions that kind of come to mind. If you know someone who has been in the industry, you might know a little bit more. You might have a little bit more insight. But the purpose that we're here for is to make sure that anyone who has even thought about it or even wondered what it means to be in this field, that we're able to address a lot of those for you and ultimately give as much information as possible. We're trying to approach this in a very non-biased way also. Obviously, Frontline EMS does send people out on wildland fires as medical providers, and we're not here to recruit. We're simply here to share the knowledge that we have of this industry from multiple perspectives. From my perspective as a manager of people that go out onto wildland fires, Mr. Goebel's perspective of running a medical unit on fires for the government, and then Mr. Dobson's perspective of actually being boots on the ground, an actual hands-on provider in the wildland setting. So I'm hoping that from all of our perspectives, we can share useful information, shed some light on many aspects of this. And again, thank you so much for being here, and thank you again, Emma, for being our lovely host today.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. As Mr. Bull was saying, you're going to have a lot of questions, so I want to turn everyone's attention to the question section where you actually can type in questions that we will receive throughout the webinar. We will address as many of those questions as time allows for. So let's go ahead and get started. When it comes to wildland fires, it's easy to think, oh yeah, that's firefighters. However, there are many positions in the medical field to be filled at wildfires. So, Mr. Bull, would you talk to us about those different positions and what they are?
Absolutely, thank you, Emma. So there is quite a plethora, and as years go by, there are more and more medical roles that are added to wildland fires, and it is a very evolving industry. Traditionally, line medics have been used the most, line medics and ambulance personnel. And a line medic they're generally individuals who are staged in a four-wheel drive capable vehicle that that are sitting there with a radio, ready to respond in a wilderness setting or remote area setting when needed. The line medics can also be teamed up into teams where perhaps if it's a BLS team, it's two EMTs in a four-wheel drive vehicle with a radio and a kit, or a paramedic and an EMT, again, in a four-wheel drive vehicle with a radio and a kit. And then we move on to a little bit more of the supportive roles, such as REMS teams. REMS teams are generally a four-person team that are all rope certified, so operators and technically trained and certified individuals. And REMS teams tend to require a minimum of one paramedic, and so they fill both rescue roles as well as medical roles. And traditionally, because there's not a lot of major accidents that happen, even REMS teams tend to maintain most of their time as medical personnel, filling minor medical duties and clinical duties as well. So on top of that, again, we have ambulances. And so ambulances can be BLS with two EMTs or ALS with a paramedic and an EMT. And then on the camp side of things, traditionally, the medical unit leader, which I think Rick can probably speak to a little bit, is responsible for, especially on smaller camps, tending to the clinical needs of the firefighters. And if it is a larger fire, sometimes, and lately quite often, they'll bring in a medical trailer or a mobile clinic that will be ran at multiple levels. They could be ran by paramedics, they could be ran by nurses, even physicians, depending on the needs of the fire. And the main thing to keep in mind is that a wildland fire, when it is set up as an incident, ultimately it becomes a very large tent city with its own population, and it requires its own infrastructure. So they'll have waterworks and food and bathrooms and showers, and so everything that little city needs gets established. But like all cities, medical infrastructure is incredibly important, especially in these very remote environments. And so the fire technically uses all these different medical roles to set up its medical infrastructure, both on the front lines and your more traditional pre-hospital roles, as well as its clinical roles. And so there is a pretty large spectrum of needs for different roles that can be filled by different providers.
How interesting. Mr. Bull, you said REMS team. What does REMS stand for?
Sure. So REMS stands for Rapid Extraction Module Support, and it's pretty much a rescue team. So the extraction that we're talking about, not to be confused with extrication, although the team can be utilized for extrication, the rapid extraction is the primary mission, and they are used and they're brought onto fires where the landscape is particularly difficult or where there may be extraction challenges when there is an injury. And yeah, REMS.
Excellent. So, Rich Dobson, you are a provider yourself, and you will be on a REMS team this year. What can you tell us about what is expected of providers on wildfires?
So what the fire would expect from medical providers is the first thing is be on time. And I don't mean just when you arrive initially on the fire, you do get several hours depending where you're traveling from, but it's every morning at briefing. Most fires have their briefing at 6:30 a.m. or it could be 6, depends on the team that's running it. You need to be there. They're going to go over everything that they're going to do that day to Meadow. You need to check in with them every morning, every evening. You need to be at your staging area when they request you there. Also, just being professional. No one wants someone who's, untucked, boots untied, anything like that. Just present yourself well. Don't swear. Treat patients, with their dignity. I'm sorry, and they also would like you to know what you're doing. I know that really should go without being said, but you need to be operating within the scope of your practice. And those are the three main things that the fire personnel look for. I don't know if Rick, as a Med-L, would have anything to add to that on what he looks for in the personnel. But
Yeah, that Rich, just kind of tacking on to what you say about that is we get a lot of brand new licensed providers, kind of their opportunity to get a little bit of experience under their belt. And with that, I kind of, for me, I ask kind of the 20 questions thing when I meet them the first time and kind of gauge their level of provider. Maybe try to pair them up with somebody who's experienced. And then also the fire side of things, not just the medical side, but fire side. We definitely want people out there that are going to be a student of fire and be able to recognize certain situations and keep themselves and people around them safe.
Absolutely. Now, as someone who has never been on a fire before, to me it seems so thrilling and like it would be fun and exciting and high adventure. Um, Dobson, can you kind of help adjust my expectations a little bit? Like what is it really like, and what struggles can providers face?
So yes, there can be moments of adrenaline and excitement, and you're watching a forest fire come towards you. But majority of it, you're actually fighting boredom. Our roles out there, everyone on the fire wants us to stay bored. Just what it is, because if we're not, then that means people are getting hurt. Other
Sure.
difficulties we have is just communications, whether it's with the radios, although they do put up relays and so forth, just the terrain, a lot of areas are mountainous and, canyons and so forth, that radio communication may be difficult. Cell phone signal, good luck. Navigating, a lot of the maps, and so especially when you first arrive on a fire or the fire's new, are using Forest Service maps that may be a bit outdated, or they thought a road was there, but it's not actually completed. Road washed out, trees went down, whatever. Another thing that's overlooked a bit is actually terminology, fire terminology that they use, the lingo the firefighters and Med-Ls and command use with us day to day. You will pick up on it rather quickly, but just initially, it may be a bit challenging to understand what people are saying.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So when considering all of this, how do you decide if Wildland Fire is right for you?
So as we said, yes, there are moments of excitement. If you like watching things burn, it's great. But you need to understand that it may be a very smoky environment. All your clothes, your tents, bedding, everything is going to be filled with smoke. You need to make sure that you're competent in your skill level. As Rick had mentioned earlier, there are firefighters who show up who are new, or not firefighters, I'm sorry, medical providers who are new to the field.
Sure.
And this may not be the best place for them to start their medical career. They should probably get some street experience and experience in hospitals or urban areas before they come out to rural areas, because your support is not, you do have support, but it may be delayed in getting to you. And a big thing that people need to realize is you may be out there camping for about 2 or 3 weeks at a time. Showers, yeah, they will try to get showers into the camp, but that's not a guarantee. Your cell phone signals, not a guarantee. Usually you'll be working 16+ hour days. That's a lot of it, but you also need to look at, are you right for the fire? As we stated, if you don't have the company skills, you don't, have a bad attitude, that can actually affect the fire community negatively. So I don't know if Rick has anything else to add on what he would, or Richard for that matter as well, on the business side. Anything that you would be looking in employers sending out in the fires?
Yeah, I think, and I can't speak for all companies. With Frontline EMS, we certainly try to hold a pretty high standard. And we want to make sure that whenever we engage with a patient, that they're getting a lot of experience in that interaction. And so as our company has grown, we've increased our rules kind of time and time again to require longer and longer experience, just because we have that luxury of a lot of applicants that we have to weed out. But there are smaller companies, there are other companies that will take less experienced providers. But ultimately, you need to kind of look inside yourself and say, if I were to be taking care of someone in the middle of nowhere with an extended patient interaction time, how am I really going to do with that? And what type of injuries am I likely to see, and how comfortable am I with attending to those? So a lot of it is not necessarily what the company demands that you're going out with, or what the agency, if you're going out directly for the government, what they require. A lot of it is your own personal abilities. And we've seen it time and time again where someone new to this industry will swing out onto a fire. It's their first fire, they're excited, you know, and then a couple of days of camping happens, and like, oh, it's a little uncomfortable. I'm not sure how I feel about that. And then their first medical happens, and they feel out of their element, and then they quit and they go home, and leaving that fire at a deficit for its coverage, which is kind of disastrous for everybody, and certainly want to avoid that. So, you know, making sure that you're not getting in over your head, and that just comes from kind of a self-analysis, really.
Sure. Mr. Bull, would you talk to us about getting hired into line medic work?
Sure. So I've had the luxury of working with other companies before starting Frontline EMS, and I've seen very easy processes, and I've created very difficult processes. So it really is all across the board. Some companies will just kind of start a database of, they'll collect names and phone numbers and provider levels, and when they need someone, they'll just call people they've never met. Unfortunately, that does happen a lot. It's not in my best taste, but there are companies that do that. And then there's others that, you know, will perhaps vet their people and interview them, and, you know, check their references and what have you, like we do. You know, generally, my advice would be that if you're getting on with a company or agency that doesn't seem to investigate your background much or test your skills or anything like that, might want to think twice about deploying with them, because ultimately you're just naming a number at that point. But normally the process starts pretty early in the year. Most companies will try to have their rosters finalized by April. You can be hired onto companies and agencies after April, especially if it's a busy fire season. But there's usually time that they like to prepare their people, make sure they understand their standards, you know, make sure their kits are together, and you know, you also have to make sure you have all your certifications in line.
Right, absolutely. We're actually going to talk more about certifications in a minute, and we've got some people asking questions about those certifications. Before we get to that, Rick Goebel, I wanted to ask you about compliance and the legalities of being on a fire, because there's your own personal physical safety, but there's a lot more to consider as well.
Yeah, you know, for us, one of the things that we want to do is make sure coming in, everybody that's coming into our fire is legally compliant. You know, and that starts with their state license. So whatever state that you're licensed in, it can be any one of the 50 states. And then what we do on the medical unit side is apply for limited reciprocity for the area that you're in with the local EMSA, the local EMS agency, having authority over that area. So we actually get your license information and your red card and submit that to the LEMSA, and then your license becomes good for that area for the duration of the incident. Most of the time, it's for the duration that you're there. A lot of these incidences are going longer than 2 weeks. So you can come in, and if you take your 2 days off and come back, your license is still good for the duration of the incident. A little bit different for paramedics. We do the exact same thing, but then you want to make sure, you absolutely have to make sure that you have medical direction and protocols, and that those protocols and medical direction are supported. You know, not just a random doctor that signed off, you know, here or there, and then you never hear from them ever again. You need to be able to have access to that medical direction. As far as what Mr. Bull talked about with mobile medical clinics coming in, when we start getting overwhelmed in camp with a little more than we can handle ourselves, we will order in a mobile medical clinic to provide the best medical care that we can to our people. And they can be staffed with anything from just a paramedic and an EMT up to an MD and RN. And that kind of opens up its own set of criteria where MDs and RNs don't have that reciprocity ability that we do with EMS providers. The doctor actually has to be licensed in the state, and then a nurse has to be licensed in a state that has a compact with the state that they're going into to be able to provide medical care for that incident within the clinic.
Sure. So I have someone asking, so I don't need my national EMT license?
So National Registry is actually not a license, it's a certification. So if all you have is National Registry, all that means is you met the criteria to become, you are certified as an EMS provider to gain licensure in the state that you reside or a state that you work in. So that's where people get really confused with that. National Registry doesn't give you the authority to practice medicine.
Okay. I have someone else asking about the red card. They said, is having an arduous physical red card required?
Yes, fireline going personnel are required to have an arduous Pac Test. Non-fireline personnel can get away with a light or a moderate Pac Test, but the odds of getting ordered just strictly as a non-line going medical provider is pretty slim. So getting into this, you want to do that arduous Pac Test, do your S130, RT130. S130, if you're brand new, you go through the entire online class, have your field day. RT130 is just that 1 day refresher to get back in. And then a caveat to that is that the red card that you get from your company is only good while you are working for that company. If you change companies mid-season, that red card that you receive from company A is not valid for company B. They have to, company B has to take your certification and your Pac Test and get you recertified into a red card for that company.
Okay. Oh, that's good to know. It's you got to do it again.
Yep.
Thank you.
And Emma, they don't have to repeat the classes. They just have to provide their certifications from the classes that they took. And the
Okay.
Pac Test.
Okay. Do they have to repeat it? Oh, go ahead, Mr. Bull.
So I just wanted to kind of speak to how they even gain those certifications to begin with. There are some organizations, especially like some community colleges, some wildland departments that will teach the various classes that you need for a red card in person. Most people tend to take them online, and so the government has a website where if you search the name of the class, you know, so and they consist of classes called S130, S190, L180, and then some FEMA certs. So ICS 100 and 700, I think 200 as well. But the agency that you're going out with or getting red carded with, they will give you a list of what certifications they require. And you can take all of them online. So if you search, simply Google the name of the certification you're trying to get, you'll generally be guided to the government website where those classes can be taken. It is the government, so there's not a lot of, it's not amazing. It's not amazing infrastructure for taking the classes. They can be a little janky sometimes. And you have to have your browser settings just right, but it is the way that most people get them. the S130 has an online component and a physical in-person component. That is something to remember. If you submit just the online portion certificate to try and attain your red card, it will get denied until you have proof of the in-person physical portion of the S130. And so you have most things you can accomplish online, and the two things you have to do in person is the field portion of your S130 and then that Pac test that Mr. Goebel was speaking about. Those are the two things that ultimately people kind of do last. They get the learning side of things done first, and then they show up and do the physical in-person classes. And
You called it the Pac test? And
Yeah.
would you explain to us what that is?
Well, you have to wear a pack, and obviously on the line, especially as a medic, you're hauling your medical gear around with you sometimes. Most of the time, you are in your vehicle with the radio, ready to respond, but the roads don't go everywhere, and so you're usually having to haul your medical gear up a trail and what have you. And so the arduous Pac test was designed for firefighters to make sure that they could not only mosey around the fire and get the work done, but when a fire turns and there's all of a sudden a very dangerous situation, that they can get the heck out of there on foot fast with all the gear that they carry. And the amount of gear that a wildland firefighter carries is pretty similar to the way of at least our medical packs and the way of the medical gear that we send out with people. And so it does apply to medical as well. We can be in those same dangerous situations where we have to evacuate people from an area of the fire really quick, and we're doing so on foot. And so the Pac test, and the reason we have to do the arduous Pac test, again, is to kind of prove that we can be in those dangerous situations and remove ourselves from those situations on foot if necessary. So the way a Pac test is conducted is there is a tester or testers that will be tracking people's times. They have to complete a 3-mile a 3-mile loop or a 3-mile track or whatever the case might be, but it has to be a 3-mile distance, which they have to complete in 45 minutes or less with a 45-pound pack. That can be a traditional backpack, a rucksack weight to that amount, or even a workout vest that weighs 45 pounds. Ultimately, this is something you must practice. It's not just something to kind of prove your grit once a year. Again, doing it one time is great, but you need to be able to do that at any time. And so I highly recommend that for personnel that are looking at getting into the wildland industry is that they constantly practice that Pac test. Make it part of their normal workout regimen where they will do their cardio with a 45-pound pack on and try to hit that 3 miles and just have that be the normal cardio exercise that they start doing, because those individuals that practice it are much more likely to pass it when the actual test is happening for the season.
Right.
Those that
And
do not
that's for anyone that wants to get near the Wildland Fire. Has to
Correct.
pass this test.
Yeah, and so there are roles at camp, like Mr. Goebel spoke to the mobile medical clinic, and historically, if those are staffed by nurses or physicians or EMS support staff, most camps will not require a red card for those individuals. But we have about 14 providers out right now on wildland fires, and just a couple days ago, their main camp had to be evacuated. So I recommend, and obviously they're having to hustle and pack up a lot of things and get things on the road really quick. I would just recommend that if you're getting into wildland fires, even if it is in a camp role where a red card may not be required, is to go into it generally at a good level. Make sure that you are maintaining a good, healthy lifestyle and a good level of fitness, so that if you have to assist in any way in a training situation, that you generally have that level of fitness about you.
Thank you. Richard, what else can you tell us about just simply preparing for the season?
Which Richard are you talking to?
Oh, sorry, Richard Bull. Thank you.
Preparing for the season. I mean, yeah, so there's a number of things that you'll need to do, especially a lot of your first season is your most difficult to prepare for because you have to acquire certain things. After that, it gets pretty easy to prepare for the following seasons. You get kind of into the ring of things and you understand what's expected. Your first season is definitely the hardest because you're dealing with terminology you don't know, names of certifications, they're just letters and numbers, and you don't know what those mean. And so honestly, doing something like this, participating in a webinar like this, is a great way of preparing for the season. Just kind of getting questions answered and getting the expectation lined out. The number one reason I think that some people will quit off of the fire line after only a few days is it's just not what they expected. And so gaining a good understanding and speaking to people that have done it is definitely step one. The other thing is if you're going to be on the fire line, you have to have personal protection equipment and clothing. And you know, some companies will supply them, and some of them don't, right? And it just depends on the individual rules of the agency or the company that you're going out with. But everyone does. It is required of everybody that that steps foot anywhere near the line. And you know, so that consists of Nomex pants. You know, and I'm sure if anyone's even seen a wildland firefighter, they recognize the iconic green pants and yellow shirt. And those are generally for aramid or other type of cloth that is fire resistant and or flame resistant. And they have to have a label inside them that show that they meet wildland clothing requirements. If they don't have that label, it can be removed and kicked off the fire for not meeting certifications. And you know, I've had some people ask, well, can I wear my flight jumpsuit? You know, because it's flame resistant, you know, which all flight jumpsuits tend to be. But no, we've been told no, if it does not have that wildland certified label in it, it is not usable. And so when you get these pieces of clothing, I recommend simply Googling, like advocating for Google or anyone, one search engine over another. But you want to search for wildland pants or wildland shirt, and generally you're getting something with those labels intact. If you are starting off with a budget because it's your first wildland fire season, obviously the money can be really, really good in this industry. But your first season, you haven't paid that money yet. You don't have to go too nice. Don't get the nicest clothing you can get. Just make sure it meets those requirements. You know, personally, I used used clothing my first wildland season because I was on a budget when I first went out with an agency that did that type of work. And you know, it worked just the same as brand new stuff too. And so yeah, the other thing you'll need are fire appropriate boots. Generally, you know, if you look for wildland boots, they're going to be pretty expensive. And honestly, the more you spend, the better quality boot you're getting. But on the medical side of things, that quality is not as important as people that are out hiking and digging line all day, every day. Generally, most men go with a cheaper pair of boots, the minimum requirements, and then after they've received some, you know, wonderful paychecks doing this work, they will upgrade and get a $400, $500 pair of wildland boots. But the only requirements for the boots is that they be leather, non-steel toe, 8-inch tall leather boots with lug sole. And if they have some sort of fire rating, that would be great. If not, the best way to make sure that you know that they're going to meet the requirements of the fire is if they have screws through the soles. Walking on hot surfaces will make your shoes and boots fall apart. So they either need a glue that is fire rated that's holding them together, or stitching that is fire rated, or again, if you just turn a boot over and see screws on the bottom, that is a boot that is going to be okay on fire.
Okay, interesting. I didn't think about the steel toed. Not, you don't want the steel toe, but that makes sense when you really think about it. Now we're close to time, so let's quickly move forward. With so many things to be excited about, as the fire season is just around the corner, I can't help think that there would also be a lot of red flags. Who can talk to me about some of those red flags?
I can, Emma. Dealing with
Excellent.
them, yeah, dealing with them on the medical unit leader side and talking to my folks that come to my fires. One of the things that you want to ask a potential employer is, how are you getting paid? Are you being paid weekly? Are you being paid bi-weekly? Are you getting paid when the companies get paid? There's legalities to every one of those that you need to consider. The other thing that has happened, and very hard to be legal, is people have been treated as 1099 contract employees, which means that to be legal, they have to have their own medical direction, their own liability insurance, their own set of protocols to be able to be that 1099 employee contractor, which means they're responsible for all the taxes, where the employer is not responsible for all of that. They also have to carry their own workers' compensation. And then the other thing is making sure, ask that company that you're potentially going to go to work for is, how's my medical direction going to work? Who can I call if I have a question, or have an issue with our protocols? Another thing is ask them what kind of fire contract do they have. Right now, medical contracting companies are right in the middle of the process of getting brand new Viper contracts. And so this year, the Viper contracts were extended. So a lot of brand new companies will not have Viper contracts, and they're going to be relying on incidents to write an emergency equipment rental agreement that's an incident only contract, which comes way down the line after contractors that have Viper contracts. So your potential for getting out sooner lies with those companies that have current Viper contracts. And then it comes down to vehicle. How are you getting to the fire? What are you going to use on the fire? Who's paying for any damages? Who's paying for mileage? Who's paying for the fuel? And what does all of that reimbursement look like? Just really good questions to ask of your potential employers.
Sure. Yeah. Mr. Dobson, as a provider yourself, what has your experience been like?
Was being a provider on the fires? What's the experience?
As far as looking for those red flags and what to be aware
Yep.
of.
Yep. So exactly as what Rick has stated, a lot of companies will go out there and say that they are offering X amount of money and it's too good to be true and so forth. But you got to look at, they're paying you as a 1099, which then again, as Rick stated, in order for you to be legal, you have to be providing your own insurance, your own equipment, your own way up there. You're responsible for your own fuel on the fire and all these other expenses that actually, when you do all that, look it down, you're not actually making as much as if you just went with a reputable company that has their, everything in line and all their stuff together. So that is one thing I would look at is, people who are offering, deals too good to be true. There is a catch to it. Also, I back up with what Rick said, how are they paying you? Weekly, bi-weekly, at the end of the fire, or is it when the company gets paid? The company can be paid up to, I believe it's 30 days after the fire is complete. Richard Bull may be able to elaborate on that if I'm correct or not. But then it's also who's supplying the equipment. Are you responsible for supplying your own oxygen, medications, AED, vehicle and all that, or is the company providing that equipment where you just got to swing by, pick it up, or they'll ship it out to you and then go out on the fire?
Sure. Excellent. Thank you. You guys have answered so many questions and this has been phenomenal. We have a number of questions that have come in while we've been talking. I'd like to address a few and we've been able to answer actually most of them. Quick question about the boots. Do they need to be lace up or can they be pull up boots, Richard Bull?
Actually, Rick Goebel, you want to take that one?
Yep, they do. They do have to be a lace-up boot. They can be a quarter lace or they can be a lace to toe. type boots. Slip-on boots are not acceptable on the fire line.
Yeah, Mr. Gill is a good authority to speak to that. He as a medical unit leader, he does have the position where if you show up and you're not up to spec, he would be the one removing you from camp. So yeah, and on the company side of that, we certainly don't like it when our providers get kicked off fires, especially if it's for a very preventable thing like not having the right type of clothing.
Excellent. Someone else is asking about a list that might outline what's required for a BLS and ALS kit. Is there a resource that you'd recommend?
At this time, unfortunately, the government doesn't have a good standardized list. My recommendation is to look at the state that you're working in. The state EMS authority will have, most of the time, has a good list on their website that's required to go through. Your reputable companies are going to have a good minimum stocking list for that BLS. That's something that we're working on for that, just because we're not 911 and we're not true backcountry wilderness. We're stuck somewhere in the middle. So we want to make sure that our providers are bringing the right equipment and not 60 pounds of gear to be able to tackle anything that they may encounter. But that would be my recommendation, is look at their local EMSA or give the reputable companies a call. I don't think any of them would have an issue with sharing a basic pack inventory with people, just so that we're all on the same page. This is all about providing good medical care to our folks that are on the line.
I'll speak to that too. Generally, the only medical personnel that absolutely have to bring their own gear are those that are registered as AD with the government. They do have to show up if they're working directly for a government agency. If you're working for a company, it is the company's responsibility to make sure that the contract is being met. Every company that gets resources sent out on fires, whether it's a pre-established contract or a contract that's written really fast the day before, within that contract, it does state that you're supposed to, it is the company's responsibility to make sure that those standards are upheld. So if you get on with a company, really they should provide kits. So our company, we have a stock of like 50, 60 Wildland medical kits that we will allow our people to deploy with. Now, some of our people say, hey, I have my own kit. It's really awesome. It meets all the same requirements. I'm really used to it. I know how to use it, and I'm more comfortable with mine. In which case, we'll allow it. But if they didn't, they'd be perfectly fine going out with a kit from our company. And sometimes if someone does have their own kit ready to go, it can make them a little bit more advantageous to send out, because we don't have to worry about the logistics of pairing up a medical provider with a kit and getting them to the same place. So it certainly helps a company out if people have their own kits, but it should not be required at all. Any reputable company will have kits available for people that don't have them. And so one thing that we do is we do have a list that we'll send people if they are putting their own kit together or they want to put their own kit together. Most companies will have a list as well that they'll send out.
Thank you. Another question about equipment. What equipment or lack of equipment will you have when working as a paramedic?
So I can go on that.
Please.
Yep, it's going to depend on what position you're doing. If you're the paramedic on an ambulance, in most cases, you're going to have a fully stocked ambulance. You're going to have all the drugs, all the medications and equipment and everything else, a stair chair for some reason. And it'll be just like working your normal 911 system. But then if you're on, let's say you're the single resource and you have to, hike out with the hand crews or hotshot crews or whatnot, you're going to have less equipment because, well, obviously you're carrying everything out with you. A lot of people that have split thoughts on this about whether or not you bring an oxygen tank with you. Because the thought is, it's always been drilled into us, patient needs oxygen, always give oxygen, but then that tank is only going to last so long, and is it really going to do any good, because will that patient be out of the area you're in but before that tank runs out? And then if you're on a REMS team, again, less equipment because you're going down with some ropes and all that. You can't be bringing huge, the cardiac monitor and all that other stuff. So as we had just discussed, a lot of companies have their own list. There's no huge standardized list that I'm aware of. But so you'll just whichever company you go out with, you'll have to meet their standards, and then usually you can always add to it if you like, but you just have to be mindful that you're adding weight, and ounces create pounds and pounds create suck. So just be mindful of that when you go out.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Dobson. I have a number of people asking about Frontline, but outside of fire season. Let's just take a quick minute. Richard Bull, if you want to address what Frontline does outside of the fire season, we just have a number of people asking what that is like. What's the most requested aid that Frontline provides?
Sure. And obviously this is not a recruiting event, so it's hard to talk about Frontline in a way that doesn't sound recruity, I guess. So Frontline EMS, we got our start in disaster response. And so we built what we call our disaster response core, and that is hundreds of providers around the country that are able to deploy rapidly when the need arises, usually requested by the federal government. And with the systems that we have in place to rapidly deploy individuals, we've been able to ultimately utilize our rapid deployment systems into other similar industries, and we've been able to become a pretty big player in deployment style EMS in general. Personally, I've always been a very adventurous person. Generally, I've stayed away from the very traditional ambulance work. It just wasn't a major fit for me. And so as a company, we've also kind of steered towards the more remote area, austere environment work, the places that other people might not want to go. And it's in our logo, daring to care no matter where. It kind of implies that we're up for things that most people aren't quite up for. And so we've got a reputation with our clients that not only can we send very, very capable people into very difficult situations, but that we can do it fast. That rapid nature, that disaster deployment speed, we do everything at that same speed. We've won contracts with certain agencies of the government, and they'll call me up the same day we've won the contract and say, well, we need to start discussing when you guys are going to be arriving. And I'm like, they're on their way. They're going to be there in a couple hours. And they're like, what? And they don't know what to do with that half the time. We only work at one speed, and that has been very advantageous. So we are marketing ourselves worldwide. I just left a conference early, an oil and gas offshore conference, where we had a lot of clients talking to us, a lot of potential clients talking to us about our remote medical abilities, both in offshore and onshore oil sites. We've been having very serious discussions with various parts of the Department of Defense in regards to providing training for soldiers and contractors of the government. Yes, as of right now, we work across multiple agencies, and we're trying to do more in the private sector now that we've kind of proved ourselves with the federal government. So there's definitely a lot of variety that we deploy for, but mostly we stick towards deployment style mission, the non-neighborhood ambulance sort of work. We will step into those roles and do emergency takeovers if an ambulance system is failing somewhere, and it's a matter of life and death because now they don't have an EMS system in a remote area. We have been trusted to step in and completely take over an EMS system or create an EMS system from scratch in a matter of 2 days. And we've been able to really show our grit with that. And other EMS agencies and other counties around the country have consulted with us for doing very similar things. So definitely a lot of variety. Check out our website if you want to see everything that we are capable of doing. We do everything from events and film set work, some very temporary deployments, to longer term deployments.
Thank you, Richard Bull. Yes, like you said, this is not a recruiting event. We've had a number of questions about that, so thank you for taking the
I
time.
would have something to add because I've been reading the questions. Everything Richard said, absolutely correct. But I also think it's important to clarify that there are contractor medical providers, but on wildfires, there's also incident management teams. You know, you can have different scales, team 1, team 2, team 3. And they not only will do wildfires, Rick can correct me if I'm misleading on this, but they do support other events and other disasters, such as, I forgot the name of the shuttle, but the shuttle that crashed over Texas and multiple other states. I've been on fire teams where they were the teams deployed for the recovery efforts of that. And I believe they're also did the teams out for the COVID vaccinations and other health disasters. So yes, it's not necessarily the company and the provider. Yes, we, Frontline will go out and do those as called upon. But also incident management teams may not just do the wildfires, they will cover other disasters as well.
Sure. Thank you. As far as education goes, we have someone asking, what kind of additional education do you recommend to prepare for the wildland area of medicine?
Oh,
Go ahead.
so I highly recommend you take a wilderness medicine course. Wilderness EMT, wilderness paramedic, or just advanced wilderness life support if you're a nurse or a physician. Learning how to do a lot with very little is a skill set that needs to be practiced tremendously and trained in tremendously. Personally, I like my providers to go through a wilderness course yearly if possible, just to maintain those skills. When we're dealing with square footage and square inches of a backpack and weight, every ounce matters and every square inch or cubic inch matters. And so you need to ultimately get very used to being very resourceful, using what you have around you, who you have around you, and what you can carry in multiple ways. And that is a skill that comes in very handy on wildland fires, and also in other remote area medical deployments tremendously. Like we're going on a jungle medicine training trip. I'm bringing some of our lucky providers with us to do that. And we're trekking into the Amazon, and we have very limited space. We're limited what we can carry on our backs, but we're expected to train in as advanced medicine as we possibly can in the middle of nowhere. And so those skills are going to be very important, not just in wildland fires, but in your career in general, if you're looking at deployment or remote area work across, in any aspect of medicine. But that wilderness class for sure, absolutely.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bull. Go ahead, Mr. Goebel.
Yeah, and in addition to that, definitely echo what Mr. Bull said about the wilderness. Going to use a lot of that on the fires. And then also the reality of things is clinical medicine. You're going to see a lot of stuff that's not 911 medicine. You're going to deal with feet. You're going to deal with some aches and minor aches and pains. You're going to deal with some gastric discomfort. So if you get some of that clinical training to be able to treat some of those non-911 EMS type problems that we're used to working when we come out of school or working in an ambulance service, and being able to deal with those expediently on the line and have good outcomes for the people that are coming to us and saying, hey, I've got a little bit of a headache, and getting to the bottom of that, or I've got a little bit of an upset stomach, or hey, I'm starting to get some hot spots on my feet, and being able to treat that and help with the preventative of those types of situations.
Right.
The clinical side of things is a very underestimated part of being a medic on wildland fires. And I personally highly recommend, if you're not a nurse or a physician, that you gain some experience in a clinical setting, because that's a very foreign thing to EMS providers. Personally, I shadowed like 300 hours in the ER, which I think really well prepared me for a lot of the things that I've been doing on wildland fires earlier in my career, and made me a really good clinician. And paramedics take a lot of pride, like, oh, I'm a clinician. Well, I mean, get some clinical experience, and then you can put that clinician title to really good use. If you've not spent time in an ER or a quick care, go volunteer, go shadow, set those things up, because just learning bedside manner, which is very different in a clinical setting from a 911 setting where you're loading and going, and you're doing what you want to do with a person generally, because it's an emergent situation, to where you have to coach someone through improving their health or improving what's going on, choosing the right over-the-counter medication. And a lot of that just comes from experience. And honestly, a lot of it is what I call mommy medicine, where these are very small, very little things, but people still come to you for it, to take out that splinter, treat that blister, put that Band-Aid on, wash gunk out of their eyeballs with a saline flush or something. These little things, they make up, I would say, about 90% of what you're going to see on wildland fires as a medical provider in any position.
I would also add in how we said 16-hour days. Most of those treatments you're going to see after that 16-hour day when the firefighters are coming back into camp. So really, at the end of the day, when you get back into camp and everyone's worked, that's when you're going to see most of your medical, minor injury, minor illness at the medical tent. So really, we're doing about 20-hour days.
Sure. Well, and everyone starts on day one. At some point, everyone's at the very beginning. So absolutely. I have someone asking kind of along the same line of education. They said that they opened their Med-L task book and they're finding it to be lacking in some areas. The basics are good, but kind of unstructured for consistency. And they're asking, is this because of the complexity of each state or agency not having consistency with standardized protocols?
Yeah, and so the unfortunate part of that is S359 was written over 25 years ago, before a medical unit leader was required to be a licensed provider. And so they really didn't think about the medical side of it. It was the admin side, the administration side of being a medical unit leader. Now we've come into, essentially, the medical unit leader is the EMS director for the fire city. You're developing that entire situation, and that's something that we're working on remedying. Right now, the Bureau of Land Management is in a pilot program for national medical direction and national protocols. So I would suspect that in the very near future, that's going to bleed over to the Forest Service. National Park Service already has that in place. And so I'm hoping that that's going to be something that you're going to see, to where we've got that basic standard. Right now, it's just going to be BLS across the board. And then the ALS is still going to come from the individual providers that show up, the companies that show up with their protocols. But across the board, looking at everybody's protocols, I ask people, hey, can I take a peek at your protocols and see if you're doing any cool stuff or anything that I've got some questions about, because I'm always learning. And they're pretty much standardized across the board. A few different medications here, a few different procedures here, based on your location that you're at. So yeah, answering that with the Med-L, with the standardization and the difference here and the difference there, it's a class that NWCG is trying to rewrite right now. They're trying to get FEMA input, because essentially the medical director position is standard across the board. It doesn't matter if you go to a hurricane, a tornado, an earthquake, or a wildland fire, the medical unit leader does the exact same job. Where it's a little bit different when a lot of the other positions in the incident management team on a fire.
Thank you. It seems like that would be a good step in figuring out which company would be right for you. Asking them those questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we have more questions about gear and supplies and lots of things that we unfortunately do not have time to address. We are out of time. We can definitely answer these questions for everyone who is curious post-webinar. As for now, we are out of time. Richard Bull, Richard Dobson, Rick Goebel, thank you so much for your time, for coming on and answering all these wonderful questions. And to everyone that joined us today, thank you for being here.